At the hands of the Japanese army, there were thousands of people who suffered during the Second World War. It's believed that up to 14 million civilians were executed and killed by the actions of the Japanese during World War II, and many Allied airmen and prisoners of war also suffered greatly. Many men who became POWs inside of Japanese captivity were a shadow of their former selves after they were starved and were forced to conduct backbreaking labour on projects such as the Burma Railway. But there were many Allied soldiers who were executed in horrific scenes at the hands of the Japanese, and they often used medieval-style executions to take the lives of 20th century men. One of those who suffered greatly was Leonard Siffleet, a young Australian commando who was captured and was then handed over to the Japanese. But his story is one which is horrific and deserves to be remembered. Join us today as we look at the execution of Leonard Siffleet, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Leonard Siffleet was born on the 14th of January 1916 in Guinea, New South Wales. He was raised alongside two brothers and a sister, and in the late 1930s he moved to Sydney and he sought a career inside of the police force. However, despite this being his dream, he was not allowed to join the police due to poor eyesight. However, his life would then go down a different path as the Second World War broke out. Australia joined the conflict on the 3rd of September 1939, following the acceptance of the UK's declaration of war on Nazi Germany. Before the war, Australia had suffered from the Great Depression, and this led to a decrease in military spending. The Australian Army was made up of 3,000 permanent soldiers and 80,000 part-time militiamen who volunteered for training. It was this that Leonard Siffleet was called up for, and he was called up to the militia in August 1940. He for a short time worked as part of a searchlight unit based at the RAAF station Richmond. But after 3 months he was discharged, and he returned home to his family as they were struck by the death of his mother. He now had to help raise his younger brothers, and to help pay for their family life, he worked as a shop assistant. But whilst in this role he enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Air Force in September 1941. He was based yet again in a signals company, but his discipline was not always amazing and impeccable, as he was reported twice as absent without leave, and it's believed he may have been visiting his fiancée. Leonard Siffleet continued to train in radio communications, but this time at college, and he volunteered for extra duties, and in particular in September 1942, he was transferred to the Services Reconnaissance Department of the Allied Intelligence Bureau based in Melbourne. He then was assigned to Z Special Unit and was sent to Cairns for further training. It was clear that his role inside of the Air Force would take him to a very dangerous place, and he was assigned as a radio operator and was promoted to sergeant. However, he was then based outside Australia at this point, as he moved to M Special Unit and took part in missions setting up a coast watching station in the hills of Hollandia in Netherlands, New Guinea. In this role he was described as the best type of NCO and young and competent, and he was a skilled man in this role. But then he was drafted into a group led by Sergeant Staverman of the Royal Netherlands Navy. Part of this group were 2 Indonesian privates, and they were to work alongside another group in Operation Whiting, conducting reconnaissance. Siffleet's group's mission began in northeast New Guinea, and they tracked across the mountainous terrain through August and September. Siffleet's group was split up at some point as they explored the countryside, and they were ambushed by natives. Staverman and Private Patival were reported as killed, but Patival did escape and rejoined Siffleet. Leonard Siffleet was practically now in control of the group, which consisted of Patival and another private Riharing, surrounded by natives who were hostile to them. They must have known the danger of their mission, and now Siffleet had to try and communicate with the other group, and he managed to warn them of hostile natives and of Japanese patrols in the area. He was ready to destroy and hide his radio equipment, but from October 1943, nothing more was heard from this group. Leonard Siffleet's fiancée had heard that he was safe and well, but this was not the case. The group had tried to make their way to the Dutch border, but during this they were subjected to a huge ambush. Around 100 hostile native villagers near to Aitape, attacked Siffleet and 2 Indonesian privates. During the skirmish, Siffleet shot and wounded one of the attackers, but they were quickly overrun and were handed over then to the Japanese. Leonard Siffleet must have known that he would be subjected to harsh and terrible treatment at the hands of the enemy, and this is exactly what happened. He was interrogated and tortured heavily, and he spent 2 weeks inside of confinement. There was no attempt to rescue Leonard Siffleet and the others, and on the afternoon of the 24th of November 1943, Siffleet, along with the 2 other men, was taken to Aitape Beach. The beach was filled with hundreds of natives and Japanese soldiers who had been gathered by the Japanese to witness the horrific execution of Siffleet and the other men. Vice Admiral Michiaki, commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy, who had ordered the executions, and it was the executioner and officer, Yasuno Chikao, who would be the man to execute Leonard Siffleet, the 27-year-old Australian signals operator and transmitter. Chikao was photographed performing the execution. There are various accounts after the war about the executioner's fate, as some said he died during the conflict, but others said he was captured by the Allies and was sentenced to death to be executed, but was instead imprisoned for 10 years. However, on the beachhead, Leonard Siffleet was led out in front of the locals, and he had been bound and blindfolded. He had been secured around his middle, and he was wearing a black blindfold to ensure he did not see what was happening. The guards stood around were armed, and the locals gazed on as if they were watching a medieval or Tudor-style execution during the reigns of brutal kings such as Henry VIII. It was almost sport to them. Leonard Siffleet was kneeling above his grave, with the executioner stood over him, with his sword raised high above his head. The officer Chikao then brought down the weapon, and Siffleet was executed in brutal fashion. The execution was truly sadistic, but it was one which was performed by the Japanese a number of different times, upon Allied airmen and Allied prisoners of war. The photograph of the execution was actually discovered on the body of a killed Japanese major after it was distributed. The American soldiers then had it published in Australian newspapers and also in Life magazine. For many years it was believed that the man in the picture was Bill Newton, who was captured and executed in the same manner. However, later identifications of Siffleet in the image took place. Leonard Siffleet's execution was one which was incredibly brutal, but it was one of a number carried out by sword during the Second World War at the hands of the Japanese forces. 2 Japanese officers even had a race using their swords as to who could execute 100 people the quickest. The contest was even publicised in Japanese media and the newspapers, and it's believed that most of the victims were actually civilians who were brutally murdered and killed. But Leonard Siffleet, as a prisoner of war, should have been treated better, but he was made to await his execution for 2 weeks, in hellish conditions and under constant torture. The image of his execution summed up the evil of the Japanese army during the Second World War, and how their horrific crimes were against prisoners of war. Very few would ever pay for these crimes, and only a few select generals were ever brought to justice at the end of the conflict for their crimes against humanity. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.